You don't satisfy Vladimir Putin. You have to create something that stops him. Vladimir Putin is a thug, a bandit, a bully. American people get this. They see this pathetic way of leading with this bravado. I don't think we should be under any illusion. Xi Jinping is not going to be a force for good. Never underestimate a Ukrainian. Never underestimate what Ukrainians can do.
Damon, good to have you with us in our studio, and welcome to Ukraine.
Sir, it's great to be with you here in Kyiv. It's great to be back in Kyiv with you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Ukrainian people used to hear and read in Western media, sometimes directly, sometimes between lines, that there is a Ukraine fatigue. How strong is that?
You know, I think it's far overblown. First of all, for me personally, for the National Endowment for Democracy, there is no such thing as Ukraine fatigue. And that's partly why I'm here right now, because we knew almost 3 years into the full-scale invasion, 10 years after Russia's attack and annexation of Crimea, attack on Ukraine, that this would be a tough time for many of our Ukrainian friends. And so we're partly here in Kyiv with a whole team from the Endowment to underscore our unwavering support. There is no such thing as Ukraine fatigue at NED. We are deeply committed. It's one of our most important priorities globally. We're in more than 100 countries around the world, but this is a top priority. That said, even in my country, across the United States, we just came through a very contentious vote in the U.S. Congress, where essentially 2/3 of American elected officials at the national level backed Ukraine on the single largest package since the war began. I think support for Ukraine has hardened. I don't buy into Ukraine fatigue.
But at the same time, I can imagine that for ordinary person somewhere, I don't know, in Ohio, which never has any plans to be in Europe at all, and Ukraine is even further. For this ordinary American people, Ukraine is definitely not a thing which matters that much.
Well, if you ask Senator Portman from Ohio or Marcy Kaptur from Ohio, these are some of the biggest champions for Ukraine in the United States. But of course, this is the case with any foreign policy issue. If you have the luxury of living in the United States as an American, it's very easy to not be so impacted by what's happening around the world, or at least to think that's the case. But that's the truth in many places around the world. You're really focused on your own community. That's not really the point. The point ultimately is to help elected representatives in our country help lead in this discussion in their communities about why support for Ukraine is so important, not just for Ukraine, but for the future of democracy and freedom, to the future of standing up to autocrats that are trying not to just attack Ukraine, but really to undermine American leadership and engagement, to undermine our alliances, to challenge the way we operate. And ultimately, this has a huge impact on quality of life, on security, on inflation rates in the United States because of what Russia is trying to inflict here in Ukraine. So it's not that hard to connect the dots, but at the same time, the American people understand there's more at stake than just pocketbook issues. There's a future of sort of moral leadership and future of freedom is at stake in the world.
Do you feel that ordinary Americans do realize it too?
I think they do. You know, look, this is not the most important issue for ordinary Americans. Just like any Ukrainian has to worry about their family, about how to put food on the table, about their security. If their son or daughter is on the front line of the fight, they're going to have immediate concerns. That's normal. That's human. That's how American voters are. They worry about their family, how to actually take care of their children, how to put food on the table, how to make ends meet. And so we're selfish in that sense, and that's okay. That's the focus of a democratic society, is to serve the interests of your own people. But I think many Americans understand there's something bigger going on. There's a bigger challenge in the world, and they understand that whether it's Vladimir Putin attacking and invading in a completely unjustified war in Ukraine, whether it's the Chinese Communist Party challenging and competing in a very unfair way economically, they see autocratic regimes on the march. They are concerned about the nature of what this means. They don't understand all the details, but understand this isn't really good.
What I see as definitely a thing that has changed during last year or so, maybe a decade, is an attitude towards Russia and perception of Russia. Especially in Soviet time, 30 years ago, Russia was a key threat for the American people. Now I don't see that it is that much of concern. China is on the top of the agenda, and Russia is rather something that we can deal with, maybe to compete China together. Is that the case?
I don't think it's that simple. I think it is true that there has been an awakening in the United States that the threat posed by the rise of a communist-dominated China is quite significant. This is a big reversal because for so long there was a theory of engagement, particularly economic, could help China become a stakeholder in the world order, if you will. I think that despite what you see about American divisions politically, we've seen one of the most rapid evolutions in our country's view and foreign policy of a consensus in both parties that China does represent a challenge to the United States, to the world order, and that the economics are not enough.
But Russia does not represent that threat for them.
Well, no, what I would say is that there's an increasing recognition, first of all, that Vladimir Putin is a thug, a bandit, a bully. American people get this. They see this pathetic way of leading with this bravado, jumping on his chest, invading and attacking his neighbors, playing to issues of sort of the past. They see through this and they understand that we're dealing essentially with a thug on the international stage who happens to have nuclear weapons. But they're also seeing Vladimir Putin with Kim Jong-un in North Korea, with what's happening with the leadership in Tehran, with Xi and China. And they understand this isn't good. These are pretty bad people who are all working together to protect and back each other up. And so I think people do recognize, look, they understood that Vladimir Putin drove his country into a cliff. If you look at the economy, the living standards, this is not an economic superpower. And yet, even with the decline of Russia economically, it has inflicted untold damage to its neighbors, to its own people, to American interests around the world. And I think that is pretty well recognized.
When it comes to Ukraine and Russian war against Ukraine, for sure everyone in the world would like to see it over. But unfortunately, I see that not everyone in the world see victory as we do. And even in America, some people would like it to be over, no matter who takes what land.
Well, look, first of all, it is a normal human sentiment to want peace. And that's a good thing, that people have a preference for peace, thank goodness. It's the folks who have turned to war like Vladimir Putin that provoke that sense of, what are you doing? Why is this worth it? The ultimate decision here, however, is going to be Ukrainian. This is your country. It's your fight. It's your struggle. Now, I think it's a bigger struggle, that it's actually part of our struggle, why we have such an obligation to support the Ukrainian people. But this is your country. This is your fight. This has to be a Ukrainian decision about what victory looks like, about how to think about peace in the future. And it is natural to want peace, but you also need justice. And I think the Ukrainian people have learned, and I think many American policymakers have learned, that an unjust peace, that appeasement can fuel and provide the seeds of conflict in the future.
Do you really see that people have got that? Because to my view, unfortunately, we still have, even in America, some politicians who would like it to be over, well, not on Russian terms, but Ukraine can make some concessions, some territorial concessions. And, well, let's make Ukrainians to accept that. Let's not feed them with this enough weaponry. And they would have to make this hard choice.
I think you're right that not everybody understands this at all. I mean, look at the history of what's happened. Because in the 2008 Bucharest summit, European leaders blocked a U.S. initiative to get Ukraine started on a path towards NATO. Because of that, we saw Vladimir Putin first invade Georgia, follow up with the annexation of Crimea, the attacks on Donbass. And I think we have seen this sense that many people don't quite understand that we're dealing with someone who, if not stopped, goes for more. If you tell him what he can get away with, he will go for it. There is a history of not understanding the power of appeasement, if you will, of a bully like Vladimir Putin. So yes, it's a painful learning lesson for some, and some have not fully learned and appreciated that. But I think you see many leaders really understanding that you don't satisfy Vladimir Putin. That's not the objective here. You have to create something that stops him and provides for a durable peace. And that's going to be the challenge for the Ukrainian people, Ukrainian leadership. It's going to be the challenge for American leadership and NATO leaders. How do you actually have a durable peace that is just and stops Vladimir Putin?
What can we do in Ukraine to increase number of those people who understand that appeasement does not work?
I think we've all got a responsibility to be able to explain this. It's partly what I do back home in the United States and talking to members of Congress that support the work of the National Endowment for Democracy, of engaging in the debates with our own people to help understand that when you're dealing with a bully, when you're dealing with a tyrant, if they see an opportunity, if they see a space to expand, they'll take it. It does require that strength of stopping it. And so I think we see evidence on the ground through Russia's track record here in Ukraine, a very, very powerful, painful lesson. So we have to listen to those who know this best. And it's why you've seen a fundamental transformation of policy inside the European Union, inside NATO, because increasingly the voices of our Baltic allies, the voices of our Nordic allies, those in Central and Eastern Europe often, who have known and the experience of communism, of Russian expansionism the best, they've begun to impact the future of these institutions. And we see a fundamentally different approach from the European Union today because of it.
You see a change in attitude in political circles of the United States to this issue of appeasement, to the war itself. How does it change? To which way?
I think there are very few people who are naive enough to think that you just have an easy agreement with Vladimir Putin. Just come to terms with it.
Some do. We see them even in the Congress.
Yeah, well, sure, but that's not, but that's normal. That's normal in a free society to have differences of opinion. And there's a long, long tradition in the United States of real skepticism towards American engagement in the world. I'd say by definition, in a country like the United States that's so big, such a landmass with oceans, it's very natural for there to be skepticism of why the United States should be so actively engaged in the world. And to some degree, that's not an unhealthy thing. We're really focused on how to take care of our own people, our own country. And that's kind of a product both of geography and of democracy. So it does take an effort to underscore why is it in our interest to support Ukraine. And yet, if you look at what's happened, we've had profound support for Ukraine. Billions and billions of dollars, almost 7% of our own defense budget has been spent as a budget for Ukraine. This is one of the largest outlays of American military and budget financial support for a country around the world in a pretty way that has been, is there a debate? Yes. But even what we've come through, this was a 2/3. We had 75, 80% of the U.S. Congress backing this. That's really remarkable. It's not like we had a hair margin vote, actually. And so I think there's always going to be dissenting opinions, a very vehement debate. But where are we coming out? Where are we coming out? We're coming out squarely on the side of the Ukrainian people.
You travel a lot across the world and you see how people address the Ukrainian issue and perceive Ukrainian issue in other countries too. In Ukraine, we have a debate whether we should focus on those countries who are our like usual allies, like the United States, other NATO allies, Europe in general. Some say that we should raise the focus on Global South, on overall support.
I think Ukrainians have been quite sophisticated about this, and it's not an either-or choice. And it's been hard for Ukraine because this is new terrain. Ukrainians aren't used to being deployed on a global basis, having relationships on a global basis. There's a legacy in Soviet and Russian diplomacy that gives them an advantage of engagement on that global stage. So first of all, you've got to have the strongest engagement and support for those who are directly behind Ukraine in its survival and its fight today. And that has been its allies, that has been the United States and Canada and its European partners. That makes a lot of sense, because who is standing behind Ukraine with military support and financial support, economic support? That's rock solid. Without that, Ukraine's in a really tough spot in this fight. And Ukraine has done that extraordinarily well. But I think this is a sophisticated enough country, a big enough country, that it can do more, and it has done more. Whether it's just the peace summit we've just seen, or whether it's in what we do with the National Endowment Democracy, responding to Ukrainian journalists and organizations that understand. I've just met with PEN America. We have other Ukrainian journalists that understand they need to host intellectuals, opinion makers, journalists from Latin America, from Africa, to help them come to the front lines, to help them come to Ukraine to see this story, to come meet President Zelensky. We also were meeting with some groups today that are working on accountability and justice. I can't tell you how significant of an issue this is globally around the world. And rather than get into a competition of suffering, is Ukraine's conflict more important than Sudan's conflict, Gaza, Israel, what's happening in Burma and Myanmar? Rather than get in comparison of conflict, what I've seen is a real ability of Ukrainians to come to the table with a sense of solidarity. Because of your horrific experience with atrocities, that you in real time are creating incredible standards of how civic actors can play a real role in demanding accountability and justice, not after the fact, but during the war. Do you know how powerful this is to share that lesson with African countries, with Latin American countries, with Asian countries who have suffered? And so it doesn't become a competition of suffering. It becomes Ukrainians showing, first of all, helping people see this isn't some geopolitical competition of the United States and Russia. Come touch, come feel, come see the Ukrainian experience. It's very powerful. And the Ukrainians saying, not just we're asking for your sympathy, but Ukrainians saying we can be partners in helping you think about how to develop your capabilities within Africa, within Latin America. That's a really, really powerful story, and one we have been proud to support at the Endowment.
So we should continue focusing on the whole world, not only on our Western allies.
Yeah, I think you have to prioritize where your support comes from. You've got to prioritize that, because that's the fight, that is the financials, that is the ability to push back on Vladimir Putin. But you are sophisticated, you can do more, and you can do both. And that's what the Ukrainian people are doing. It's pretty powerful.
Probably we should also not give up our hope to convince China to step out of supporting Vladimir Putin, or it's rather not realistic to
Look, this is complicated. I don't think we should be under any illusion. Xi Jinping is not going to be a force for good. Xi Jinping and the People's Republic of China is giving Putin oxygen, giving them space. First of all, they've helped degrade the international norms. They've helped degrade the sense of international justice and rule of law. They've helped weaken issues of accountability inside the United Nations systems and others. So what Beijing has done has tilted the playing field in a way that makes it more acceptable for Vladimir Putin's behavior. That's a problem. Now, I don't fault Ukraine for trying to have a sophisticated diplomatic game to keep China as far away from this fight as possible. But I don't think we can be under any illusion that Beijing is going to be an even broker here. They've played their cards. They've tilted the deck towards Vladimir Putin.
And the last question, do you believe that Ukraine will win in Ukrainian understanding of this storm?
I have great confidence in Ukraine. You think about what we've been doing. We started standing by Ukrainians that believed in their future in 1988. Nobody thought this was possible. We've seen over and over again Ukrainians who've demanded more from their own leaders, from the granite protest to the Euromaidan, the Revolution of Dignity, to even today in the midst of war, Ukrainians are pushing for reforms to strengthen. This place inspires me so much. Never underestimate a Ukrainian. Never underestimate what Ukrainians can do. We saw everyone underestimate Ukraine in the Battle of Kyiv. I wear this every day to remind me, bullets from Russia's attack on Kyiv, never to underestimate Ukrainians. It's not for us to decide your future. You're going to do it. It's your country. It's your fight. It's your struggle. We were proud to be your partners and stand 100% behind you in determining what is just for Ukraine's future.
So the answer is definitely yes.
Yes.
Thank you for believing in my country and thank you for supporting Ukraine. Дякую вам, що додивилися це відео. Для нас важливо розуміти, що відбувається у світі. Лишайтеся на Європейській правді, каналі про Європу, НАТО та роль України у світі. До побачення.